Southeast Asia is no stranger to typhoons. These powerful storms, also known as hurricanes or cyclones in other parts of the world, have long been a part of life in the region. However, something has changed. Typhoons are becoming more intense, more frequent, and more destructive. Climate change is to blame. Scientists are sounding the alarm. Their research reveals a clear link between rising global temperatures and the intensification of these tropical storms. Warmer ocean waters are providing more fuel for these storms, leading to stronger winds, heavier rainfall, and more devastating impacts on coastal communities. The consequences are already being felt across Southeast Asia. From the Philippines to Vietnam, coastal communities are facing unprecedented levels of destruction. Homes are being destroyed, livelihoods are being lost, and lives are being cut short. The situation is dire, and it is only going to get worse if we do not act now. The world must wake up to the growing threat of super typhoons in Southeast Asia. We cannot afford to ignore the science or delay action any longer. The time to act is now. The science is clear. Warmer oceans lead to stronger typhoons. As greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise, the planet is warming, and the oceans are absorbing much of this excess heat. This warming effect has a profound impact on the formation and intensification of typhoons. Typhoons are fueled by the heat energy released when water vapor condenses. Warmer ocean temperatures mean that more water evaporates into the atmosphere, providing more fuel for these storms. As a result, typhoons are becoming more powerful, with stronger winds, heavier rainfall, and larger storm surges. The link between ocean temperatures and typhoon intensity is well established. Scientists have observed a clear trend of increasing typhoon intensity over the past few decades, coinciding with rising ocean temperatures. The evidence is overwhelming. Climate change is making typhoons more destructive. We cannot afford to ignore this reality. The consequences of inaction are too great. We must take immediate action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Climate change is not only making typhoons stronger, it is also altering their tracks. Scientists have observed a shift in typhoon tracks in recent years, with storms tending to form and intensify closer to coastlines. This shift poses significant risks to coastal communities, which are now more vulnerable to the devastating impacts of these storms. The reasons for this shift in typhoon tracks are complex and not fully understood. However, scientists believe that changes in atmospheric circulation patterns driven by climate change may be playing a role. These changes can influence the steering currents that guide typhoons, causing them to deviate from their traditional paths. The implications of this shift are profound. Coastal communities that were once considered relatively safe from typhoons are now facing a much greater threat. This increased risk underscores the urgent need for adaptation measures to protect these vulnerable populations. We must invest in early warning systems, resilient infrastructure, and community preparedness programs to mitigate the impacts of these shifting typhoon tracks. The safety and well-being of millions of people depend on it. Coastal communities in Southeast Asia are on the front lines of the climate crisis. As typhoons become more intense and frequent, these communities are facing the brunt of the devastation. Homes are being destroyed, livelihoods are being lost, and lives are being cut short. The impacts of these storms are far-reaching. Coastal erosion, flooding, and storm surges can cause widespread damage to infrastructure, agriculture, and fishing grounds. The economic and social costs of these impacts are staggering, pushing already vulnerable communities further into poverty. The human toll of these disasters is immeasurable. The loss of loved ones, homes, and livelihoods can have devastating consequences for individuals, families, and entire communities. The psychological trauma of these events can linger for years, leaving lasting scars. We cannot ignore the plight of these communities. We must act now to provide support, build resilience, and protect those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The science is clear. Climate change is fueling typhoons. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is making typhoons more intense and destructive. The link between rising global temperatures and the intensification of these storms is well established, supported by decades of research and observation. Multiple lines of evidence point to this conclusion. Scientists have observed a clear trend of increasing typhoon intensity over the past few decades, coinciding with rising ocean temperatures. Climate models, which are used to project future climate scenarios, consistently show that typhoons will continue to intensify as the planet warms. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, the leading international body for the assessment of climate change, has concluded that it is extremely likely that human influence has been the dominant cause of the observed warming since the mid-20th century. The IPCC also states that it is extremely likely that human influence has increased the probability of extreme events such as typhoons. The science is clear: climate change is real. It is human-caused, and it is making typhoons more dangerous. We must act now to address this urgent threat. A call for action, reducing emissions, building resilience. The time for debate is over. The science is clear and the evidence is all around us. Climate change is happening now, and it is having devastating consequences, particularly in vulnerable regions like Southeast Asia. We must act now to reduce emissions, build resilience, and protect those most at risk. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is paramount. We must transition away from fossil fuels and embrace clean, renewable energy sources. We must invest in energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, and responsible land use practices. We must work together as a global community to address this global challenge. But reducing emissions alone is not enough. We must also invest in adaptation measures to build resilience to the impacts of climate change that are already being felt. This includes strengthening coastal defenses, improving early warning systems, and developing drought-resistant crops. We must also prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable communities who are often disproportionately affected by climate change. This includes providing access to clean water, sanitation, and healthcare, as well as supporting sustainable livelihoods. The task ahead is daunting, but we cannot afford to be daunted. The future of Southeast Asia, and indeed the entire planet, depends on our actions today. Adaptation is key, protecting vulnerable populations. As climate impacts intensify, adaptation measures are vital for Southeast Asia's vulnerable populations. These communities face frequent typhoons, rising sea levels, and other disasters. Building resilience is essential for protecting lives and livelihoods. Adaptation includes seawalls, mangroves, early warning systems, and climate-smart agriculture. Community-based adaptation empowers locals to implement tailored solutions. Investing in adaptation is smart. The costs of inaction are far greater. By investing today, we save lives and build a sustainable future. Typhoon Yagi, a stark reminder of the urgency. Southeast Asia has been battered by devastating typhoons, highlighting the urgent need for climate action. Typhoon Yagi in 2018 was one such storm. It brought torrential rainfall, powerful winds, and widespread flooding. Millions were affected, with significant economic costs. This trend of intense typhoons is driven by climate change. As the planet warms, more storms like Yagi will occur. We must act urgently to reduce emissions and protect vulnerable communities. The future is now taking action today for a safer tomorrow. The impacts of climate change are no longer a distant threat. They are being felt here and now, and from more intense typhoons to rising sea levels that threaten the lives and livelihoods of millions. But amidst these challenges, there is also hope. Across Southeast Asia, governments, communities, and individuals are taking action to address the climate crisis. They are investing in renewable energy, promoting sustainable agriculture, and building more resilient to a low-carbon, climate-resilient future will not be easy. Fundamental shift in the way we live, work, and interact with the planet. But the benefits of taking action far outweigh the costs of inaction. By investing in climate action today, we are for generations to come. We are creating a world where children can grow up in healthy environments, where communities can thrive, and where our planet can continue to support the future. Create a world that is worthy of our children and grandchildren. A conclusion: our shared responsibility to protect Southeast Asia. The escalating fury of super typhoons in Southeast Asia is a clear and present danger, a stark illustration of climate change's devastating impact. This is not a future threat, it is our current reality. The science is unequivocal. Climate change is intensifying these storms, pushing vulnerable coastal communities to the brink. Our shared responsibility is clear. We must act decisively and with urgency. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is paramount. We must also prioritize adaptation strategies. Let us act now with courage and determination to protect this vulnerable